Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Scott McCumber and Cucumber Reacts coming back at you with another video. Today's video, as you can tell from the title, is going to be a little bit unconventional. I'm doing a reaction to one of my favorite YouTubers today, Alex O'Connor. And if you don't know who Alex O'Connor is, and if you don't know who he is, I don't know why you would be clicking on this video or why you would be watching. But Alex O'Connor is a philosophy YouTuber, atheist agnostic, very interested in consciousness, very interested in AI, very interested in the history of philosophy. He's a very bright young mind. He's 27 years old. He was born in 1999. I was born in 1990, and I've been studying these topics of consciousness, spirituality, philosophy, religion, for about 20 years, and I have 9 years on Alex, 9-ish years, and I think I have something unique to offer to the table as well. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to watch one of his videos and just create a dialogue, create a conversation, and just sort of give my criticisms, constructive criticisms, feedback, critiques, and my general thoughts about what his arguments are and what he says. Philosophically, I should say I'm like Alex. I'm atheistic philosophically, though I do have a very unique position in the sense that I'm a lot more aligned with a thinker like Sam Harris. I'm not a Buddhist per se. I don't have the same background that Sam does. My background was in Hindu mysticism, otherwise known as the strains of Advaita and Advaita Vedanta that evolved out of the literature that was in the teachings that were based around the Upanishads. And that's sort of like my background. So we have this self, no self dichotomy in Eastern schools of thought. And I come from the background of listening to people like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj and Papaji, H.W.L. Punja, Muji, and that's sort of where my lineage is. But philosophically, I don't think there's a personal deity. I don't think that's a logically coherent belief. But spiritually, we could say I have a very rich, deep appreciation for non-duality, for metaphysics, and for theism, and for religion, and for matters of consciousness and of pure awareness and of spirit and the metaphysical realm and all of it. So I have a very kind of strange sort of position, and I'm a very strange, eccentric person. But all of that aside, the reason I laid all that out is so you guys could get a little bit of a background about where I'm coming from and how I'm going to be approaching this video. I'm not here to argue with Alex. I'm not here to sort of one-up him, or I can't really do that because only, very few people are going to see this video. But Alex is, his level of success as a YouTuber is unbelievable. And he's got a much wider, broader audience. He's probably also a lot smarter than me. And so I'm not here to try to pick apart and to nitpick and to undermine his video. I'm just here to offer my perspective, create a dialogue, create a conversation, and see if we can show what it looks like when another atheist who's got more of this mindful sort of spiritual side to their consciousness and their being encounters what I'm expecting is going to be a lot more standard, reductive, materialist arguments for the non-existence of a deity. So let's get into a little bit of the early, I'm guessing this is an early presentation by Alex. It came out 2 years ago, so I'm sure his position...
My name is Alex. I am a graduate of philosophy and...
I'm sure his position has evolved since this time. And I think I even heard him say that he's agnostic on the issue of materialism strictly because of the reality of first-person conscious phenomenology and experience. He can't solve the riddle of consciousness, not by thinking about it. That's an insight that people have had and will continue to have. And I think that's dawning on him slowly. But I think he's come to grips with some of the limitations of materialism as a metaphysic recently. And I expect that this video will be much more in line with more of the typical arguments you hear from materialist atheists. And I'm sure there'll be a good bit about the Bible in there, a good bit about evolutionary biology in there, a good bit about, we'll just have to see. But we're going to get into it. This is Alex O'Connor. This is why I don't believe in God. And I'm going to watch this and give you guys a little bit of my feedback and a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of my insight into what he's talking about here.
My name is Alex. I am a graduate of philosophy and theology, and I'm a YouTuber. And that's about all there is to me, I'm afraid. But I'm ready when you are. If you could let me know when I've got 2 minutes remaining, so by saying 2 minutes, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, of course, Brian and Jonathan and Sattler College and ladies and gentlemen for coming. This is the second time that I've engaged with Jonathan publicly. I'm glad to pick up where we left off. We didn't quite get to the bottom of God's existence last time. I'm confident we might get there today. I wonder, it'd be quite interesting just to get a feel of the room, actually. How many people here are Christians? Is that the time? Okay, well, it looks like I've got my work cut out for me, but that's my favourite kind of debate, I think. Of course, this is an opening statement, so I won't respond to the arguments you've just heard just yet. Instead, I want to make my own case that upon an honest analysis of the world we find ourselves in, it should compel us to dismiss the hypothesis of a supernatural creator.
Because he's a naturalist. But the thing is that if he would say, like, it's a much different thing, and this gets back to Arthur Schopenhauer, is that Arthur Schopenhauer, when he wrote The World as Will and Representation, he was attempting to parse out what experience and what existence was made of. Okay, not in the sense of a scientist, but in the sense of identifying noumenal facts about experience as an external object that we see and feel and experience. And so his book, The World as Will and Representation, was all about the world and what he identified as the noumenal will that was driving this experience. And where I come from in the school of Advaita Vedanta, it's the lens of our analysis is actually turned the other way around. It's not so much about perception per se, but the perceiver in itself. And I do think that if we take this approach and we look inward at the very source of our own experiencing as a subject, then we will find that, well, I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to lay out a massive philosophical treatise on YouTube about my position about this issue, but I'll just say that we don't have to look at the world and say, this is the world we find ourselves in. There can't be a supernatural creator because of X, Y, and Z. We can actually look at ourselves as conscious entities and look at that base fact and say, what does this say about the reality of the supernatural? Is there room for something outside of this pure awareness? So I feel the very trees shaking in this metaphysical forest right now. But we're going to get into what he has to say here.
I will not be asking you to look in ancient scripture, nor to the beginning of the universe, nor indeed down a microscope. Instead, just to your direct experience of the world and facts about the lives of people within it. I will, however, indulge in a brief biblical recital because I want to begin with a reading from the book of Psalms. So if you could all turn to Psalm 139, unless, of course, you've already committed this famous passage to memory. Verse 7 onwards reads, "Where can I go from your presence? Or where can I flee from your spirit? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths of the Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall guide me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. This poem in its entirety is given by the NRSV a title, The Inescapable God. It's a message of bold reassurance to the believer, reminding them that since God is present everywhere, pervading every inch of our universe, he is, in the happiest sense possible, inescapable. But my first argument, and it's going to be the first of three, against the viability of theism, flows from the demonstrable fact that this divine consolation is seemingly not offered universally, and often in fact restricted from those who want it the most. I'm going to be making the claim specifically that atheism or naturalism provides a better account for three facts of our universe. The first being the hiddenness of God, the second being the geographical, statistical arrangement, shall we say, of religious belief, and the third will be the problem of gratuitous suffering, and we'll see if we get time to finish it off.
Okay, so we're going to get into the depth of his arguments here soon, but those very three arguments are good arguments, I would say. The hidden face of God, the fact that there are even atheists who are literally crying out for an experience with a loving Father and can't get it, and they feel starved and destitute spiritually, and they're miserable and they suffer. And the fact that geographically we're all following different faiths, and there are cultures where they don't have a highly developed theology like you found in Europe during the Middle Ages or anywhere else in the world, and there are pockets of civilization on the planet that are ignorant of the gospel and will always be so. And thirdly, that all these I saw another video with Alex where he was debating 25 Christians. I think it was the Jubilee channel, that video, and he said that the presence of suffering makes God's existence unlikely. And he has read a lot about, Alex in particular, I know he's read a lot about veganist philosophy and studies, and thinks very deeply and carefully about the suffering of non-human animals, the needless suffering that many of them endure. And that's a very good point. That's a very good argument for atheism, I think.
Far from being unable to escape God, there is a very real contingent of non-believers, and I would count myself among their number, who are unable by any means to discover him, who seek and do not find, who knock and receive, as it were, no answer. This strange phenomenon is known as the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God, then simply, why is he hidden from so many of us so much of the time? If theism is to offer a sufficient account of reality, then it must offer an account of what J.L. Schellenberg has famously labelled non-resistant non-belief, which he distinguishes from resistant non-belief. It's sometimes said by a theist who wishes to explain the problem of divine hiddenness that people simply disbelieve through their own fault. They're too stubborn. They're purposefully blinding themselves to the evidence because they don't want it to be true. They're not approaching the argument honestly with an open heart.
Wow.
And that if they would only do this, then God would surely reveal himself. Such a person would be what Schellenberg calls a resistant non-believer. He disbelieves in some sense because he actively resists it. For what it's worth, I do think that such people exist. I think many such people exist. There are people who come to this debate with their minds already made up. There are people who want it not to be true, that God exists, and in fact wouldn't submit to that truth even if it were true. There was a recent poll run by the Atheist Experience YouTube channel, which I know, Jonathan, you're a fan of, which asked, if there was a God, would you worship it? To which an astonishing 85% of respondents said that they would not. There are, however, also people who disbelieve in God, not out of resistance or stubbornness or a hardened heart, but rather due to sheer lack of conviction. Indeed, many such people actively want to be convinced of God's existence and would jump at the chance of entering into a relationship with him if they thought that he did. But no matter how hard they search, they simply find no answer forthcoming from the heavens, and this is the non-resistant non-believer. Formally, then, Schellenberg's problem of divine hiddenness can be stated as follows. Premise 1, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving, something I'm pretty sure Jonathan agrees with. Premise 2, if a perfectly loving God exists, non-resistant non-belief does not occur. Premise 3, non-resistant non-belief does occur. 4, therefore, no perfectly loving God exists, and the conclusion from the first premise is that therefore there is no God. A loving God, like the Christian God, would surely not refuse any willing person from developing a relationship with him. And so if somebody is truly non-resistant and open to receive...
See, this is what I'll say about this. It's a very good argument at a certain level, but when you think about the issue a little bit more deeply, you can see that religion and theology and philosophy more broadly are merely domains of human experience and endeavor and expression. Which means that if you want to know about these things, you can delve into those subjects. Anybody can initiate, for example, a psychedelic drug experience if they truly want it and they try to obtain it and they set aside a block of time to do it and they're in a safe environment. And you can have a transcendent experience. Anybody who wants to learn about the nature of consciousness, their own consciousness and their own being, there are texts and teachers and there's knowledge, an entire body of knowledge in that domain that can take you into that realm. If you want to study metaphysics, you can. If you want to study religion, you can. But the mistake that is made is that people somehow believe that whatever we have to narrate about this experience or say about the nature of capital T truth or capital G God or capital R reality, that it must submarine all of the elements and aspects and domains of human experience, and that it would be the only thing, it would be evident everywhere, and that it would be the only thing anybody ever encountered, and it would be blatantly obvious, and that everybody would have immediate access to it. You know, it's like, the way I put it is I say that we could say this realm of spirituality, it may perhaps be the primary or chief domain, the master domain of human experience and human life. But it is not the only one. And just like anything else, if you want to know about engineering, you've got to study to become an engineer. If you want to know about medicine, you've got to study medicine and become a doctor. If you want to study finance, you've got to study investments and finance and become an expert in that realm. Spirituality, religion, philosophy, theories about reality, theories about truth, theories about God, the experience of God, that whole domain, it's a specific room in this big building we call human expression and reality and human truth. So to me, that explains the problem of hiddenness. It's not that these people are hardened or they're resistant to the idea of a spiritual reality, or we should say more broadly metaphysics, or even of the idea of a creator God, but their nervous systems aren't wired in a way that would lend them over to that kind of experience. Like saying some people aren't musical, some people don't know what to do with money, some people aren't sports fans. I think that is the situation that we're dealing with. But if you seek to elevate this realm of what we could call broadly spiritual knowledge above the human experience and try to be above the frame, then you're going to be asking that domain of experience to cash something out that it can't do. And you're going to be seeking some dominant, self-evident, we could even say that consciousness as a bare fact is self-evident and obvious, but that it's universal. But even there, we have people that aren't convinced. So this is kind of the issue that we keep running into.
In God's grace, we should expect them to receive it. Thus, Schellenberg's assertion that if God exists, then non-resistant non-belief does not exist. The question, then, is there such a thing as non-resistant non-belief, a non-resistant non-believer? To which all I can really say is, nice to meet you. The last time I debated Jonathan a number of years ago, when I was just a few months out of being a teenager, I said that even if I found Christianity to be true, I still wouldn't want to worship the God that it promotes. I now, since then, have realized how irrational and
Okay, I'm going to get another cup of coffee. I'll be right back. I'm sorry. Back to it.
defeating this assertion is, and stand before you today as an example of a non-resistant non-believer. I think it would be great if God existed. I really do. I would absolutely love to escape death. I would relish being a recipient of unconditional love. Less selfishly, I would love to be able to worship that which deserves to be worshipped. I just don't think it's true. Now, try as I might, look where I can, I find no response, no hint, nothing. I don't choose to disbelieve in God any more than I choose to disbelieve in aliens, despite how much I might want them to. So when faced with a psalm like Psalm 139, I'm overwhelmed with a sense not of beauty and consolation, but envy and disappointment. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? Where can I go, I should ask in response, to find it? Of course, you cannot know my heart. You can't know if I'm truly as non-resistant as I claim, but I hope that my actions here might betray me. As a Catholic child, I was once an altar boy. I would serve the altar of Mother Church every Sunday, dressed in a white robe. In the time since then, I have, to put it mildly, been looking for God. I went to Catholic schools. I studied philosophy and theology at A-levels. I made a career out of engaging with religious arguments. I have explored arguments from contingency, from fine-tuning, from motion, from mathematics, from irreducible complexity and the alleged resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. It may surprise my followers online to learn that at university I visited numerous churches on the invitation of various friends. I spent hours talking with religious friends until the sun rose again, if you like. I attended Bible groups regularly too, which might surprise people as well. And in fact, I still do attend such groups. Just recently, I agreed to embark on a series of study of the wisdom literature, specifically reading it again in the hopes that this time I might finally feel a divine presence seeping from between the lines. I moved into a house for a year with two devoutly Christian housemates with the express intention of seeing if the obvious truth of Christianity and theism that people like to talk about can be found in the...
He's such a brilliant person. He's really a gem. I hope you guys, we lost Hitch to cancer, and maybe it was Hitch's time. I mean, he'd already kind of trailblazed and made his way and made his mark. Alex is making his right now, and we're going to remember this dude. We're going to remember Alex O'Connor. He's so earnest, and his earnestness in engaging with these questions is what makes it fuels a fire in me to continue the activity of philosophy, even though and of the study of religion. It makes me want to keep doing this, even though I experience periods of frustration, disillusionment. I feel let down. I feel like the activity's ineffective. I feel like maybe I need to outgrow this. Maybe it's not nourishing me anymore the way it once did. Maybe I don't care, but seeing his passion, it's really something to behold.
Minutiae of daily life. I have looked, in other words, in a great deal of places. I read Athanasius and Anselm. I read Augustine and Aquinas. I looked in Julian of Norwich and Catherine of Siena. I looked at the sociological origin of religious belief in Durkheim and Marx and Freud and Jung. I looked at religious experience in William James and Rudolf Otto. I've looked in the modern works of people like Ed Feser and Bill Craig and Michael Murray and Richard Swinburne and Alvin Plantinga. I've looked in poetry. I've looked in the Psalms. I've looked in Job. I've looked in Ecclesiastes. I've looked in Dostoevsky. I read C.S. Lewis. I listened to worship music. I prayed. I studied the gospel. I even got an actual degree in theology from a university. And nothing. Nothing. Not once, not nearly, not ever, not even briefly have I experienced anything that speaks to the existence of a God in the universe. I think it's asking a lot of any atheist to seriously engage with a religion that he does not believe is true in any circumstances. But I feel like I have gone above and beyond what can be reasonably expected of any atheist who wishes to entertain the God hypothesis, and for my efforts I have been awarded radio silence. The inescapable God of the NRSV, in other words, is for me the invisible God, or the inapproachable God, the deaf, distant God. The best account that I can give of this experience of complete and utter silence from deaf heaven is that all that truly exists to me is impersonal space and air and rocks. I know, it sucks. I'm sorry. It's a shame, but there's no need to cry about it. And nothing more. My question to Jonathan, then, is simple. How can theism account for this lived experience? How can it account, in other words, for non-resistant non-belief? And if atheism, doesn't atheism offer a better explanation at the very least? Am I a non-resistant non-believer? If so, what offers a best account, or a better account, of such a condition? A universe in which there is a loving God who does want to be my friend, but is for some reason refusing, or hiding, or toying with me? Or a universe without one? Or is there no such thing as a non-resistant non-believer, which is the only remaining option? Do we all secretly resist in some way or other? After desperately, in other words, trying to convince myself of God's existence for years and being left painfully unconvinced, will you just submit, as if to add insult to this spiritual injury, that this is in some way my fault? And if it is, then what could I have done differently? What should I be doing differently? What could I possibly have done differently given the course of my life? Now, assume for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, the alternative hypothesis of naturalism, of atheism, and ask if it provides a good account of non-resistant non-belief. And I think the answer is obvious. But it does get worse yet. You'll remember that my second fact that I said that I would bring up is the geographical predictability of religious belief. Not only does theism need to account for non-resistant non-belief, but also for the fact that such belief is unequally present across the globe. Stephen Mason has pointed out that the populace of Saudi Arabia is 95% Muslim and therefore 95% theistic, whereas the populace of Thailand is 95% Buddhist and therefore, at best, 5% theistic. How likely you are to be a theist, in other words, is intimately tied to the place in which you happen to be born. What can better explain this geographical spread? Theism or naturalism? Or
To me, that's a very good argument, and I've used that argument in debates, conversations with theists in the past when I was more concerned with winning a debate and force feeding my perspective onto other beings. But scoring a few points on the scoreboard of an argument with somebody. But to be honest, that's not really a very interesting line of inquiry. It doesn't yield further creative thinking about anything. It is true that if you're born in China, you're more likely to be, Buddhist, maybe Mahayana, maybe if you're in Tibet, you'll be Tibetan Buddhist. Maybe if you're in Saudi Arabia, you'll be Muslim. Maybe if you're born in the Midwest in America, you'll be a Baptist. And that is that's a direct line of thinking that can really undermine much of the project of, we could say, what is currently stands as Christian apology, or it could even be Muslim apology, or anybody who thinks that their spiritual system and their philosophy, or that thinks that their theology, we could say, is all-encompassing, universal, and it's applicable to everybody, and it's obvious. And Alex is just basically showing that the facts, sociologically, that they don't bear that truth out. Humans haven't really made up their mind about who God is yet, and we've been blabbing about God for 5,000 years. So, very good argument. I just don't, I personally, I wouldn't spend too much time belaboring that point.
Atheism. Well, let's consider our two competing hypotheses. Could it be that God does exist, but that the Thai are simply naturally 20 times more likely to be resistant to belief in God than, say, the Saudis? Are they just naturally 20 times more stubborn or something? This seems implausible. This doesn't seem to be their fault. Okay, so maybe then it's not their fault, and God just has some reason to hide his face disproportionately more from the Thai than from Saudis, or indeed from those born here in Massachusetts, which has a theistic, according to one statistic, is 75% theistic. If theism is true, it seems to me that God has a lot to answer for here. Is it not troubling, Jonathan, for as a Christian, that your place of birth is a reliable statistical indicator of how likely you are to be saved? I'll say that again. Your place of birth, which is entirely arbitrary, is a reliable indicator of how likely you are on Christianity to be saved. You're significantly more likely to be a theist if you're born in Rwanda than if you're born in Thailand. Can this situation really obtain under the supervision of a God who wants to come to know us and makes his existence equally accessible to all? The chances seem infinitely small. Now consider naturalism or atheism. Religion varying by region is exactly what we would expect if it is a man-made cultural phenomenon, and nothing like what we should expect if there is, in fact, one true God who loves all equally. Again, I think atheism provides a much stronger account of this fact of our world. Finally, then, the third fact of our universe, which is gratuitous suffering. Gratuitous here means something like unjustified or unwarranted or meaningless. I do this because it's easy to see how some instances of suffering may be beneficial in certain circumstances, or necessary to bring about some desirable state of affairs, some desirable end. But the existence of meaningless...
Now, this is a much more interesting line of questioning, because a line of inquiry in that it has the potential to cultivate and to seed some really interesting thinking. And it's just a lot more philosophically fertile, in my view. The idea that suffering itself, not that suffering is unpleasant, but that suffering exists at all. This is as profound a question for agnostics, atheists, deists, theists, doesn't matter. People are suffering all over the world. We got to figure out why. We got to figure out how to limit it, how to ameliorate it, how to lessen it, how to make it better. And the fact that it does exist is a definite problem. For anybody that wants to posit that there's a divine, all-loving, all-powerful dictator in the universe, to borrow Christopher Hitchens' language, if God's in control of everything and he's all loving and all good, then what's going on, So that's always, why are we in the place where we're at, where everybody's suffering to varying degrees? From my own perspective, I see suffering as the very, as being tied up in, and I don't have a full theory about this. I'm not about to school anybody about this, but for my part, I view consciousness and sentience itself and suffering being inextricably linked and tied to one another. For example, we're concerned about AI becoming conscious. Many people are at least peripherally aware that we could end up creating a machine that's sentient and that is conscious and that would need to be offered some protection and some rights, and that we would need to treat it with love and dignity and respect and make sure that we didn't unleash upon it undue suffering, needless suffering. And this is something, or that it may be like a super intelligence that just makes up its mind that human beings are a waste of time or useless or need to be annihilated, and there's all sorts of scenarios. And this is playing on the public consciousness right now, the public mind. And what I would say is that how do we know if an AI is conscious or any being is conscious? Does it have the capacity to suffer? I don't hear that point made very much in these circles. But the more deeply you understand awakeness, the more deeply you get in contact with your own being and your own the fact of your own awareness, the more you can see that suffering itself is not only a problem experientially, but that your very ability to have an experience, your very ability to perceive, that it somehow generates the potential for suffering. And that is something that I'm not prepared to offer a philosophy or a reason or a theory about why that's the case. I just deeply sense that that's the case. You know, that's why the Buddha said that life is suffering, because it was just this throwing up the hand saying, like, if you're a human being, you're going to suffer. And then it was like, well, what do we do about this? And that's the story of the Buddha, you know? And the promise of enlightenment and the myth of enlightenment has generated a lot of suffering in people. And I think what we can do in our own lives, on this much smaller scale of what we do daily as people, is try to limit suffering where we can, but we also have to be open to the ability to allow ourselves to suffer and not to immediately seek relief. You know, so anybody who's gotten to that level, very mature being, to say, you know what, I'm experiencing some unpleasantness right now, and that's okay. Because suffering has classically been defined as unpleasantness. And we know that when we wake up in the morning, that there's a potential for unpleasantness and pain throughout the day. And I guess what comes along with a certain level of psychological maturity is just understanding that that's okay. You know, that there's not some, you don't immediately need to reach for some sort of medicine or therapy, that you can endure it, you know, and learn to give a hug to the much broader arc of your day and all of the ups and downs, and not need to maintain this blissful state of consciousness, not to chase states. You know, I'm getting into some very woo-woo territory right now, but that's just how I see this issue. And I'm going to listen to what he has to say.
Or unnecessary suffering does seem to be incompatible with the existence of a God who loves us and has the power to prevent it from happening. We're sometimes told that God has morally sufficient reason to allow suffering to exist. Indeed, if God is good, then he must have such sufficient reason. Perhaps suffering is necessitated by human free will. Perhaps suffering helps to develop a person's moral character, or maybe it's necessary to achieve some other end that God wishes to bring about. But intuitively, there appear to be instances of suffering that cannot serve any such end. And if even one example of these turns out to be an actual case of unnecessary or meaningless suffering, this would be enough to cause a problem. I want to propose something that might sound a little strange at first, which is that the biggest problem for theism here is not, famously, the great, intense sufferings of the world, like holocausts or earthquakes, but rather menial, less significant suffering, like being caught out in the rain, or stubbing your toe, or tripping over a curb on the street. Why? It seems a tad absurd, I'll grant you that, but consider this. When we experience a great suffering, like the death of a loved one, or a devastating earthquake, or indeed a holocaust, it's easy to imagine that this might somehow be part of a grand plan. The depth of our suffering may make us into better people. The people who die may be experiencing a much happier state of affairs in the afterlife now. Perhaps by allowing the Jewish Holocaust to take place, God makes it such that we are far less likely to allow even worse projects of genocide to occur in the future. But what could possibly be served? What possible end could be served? What possible meaning could there be in subbing your toe, or tripping over a curb, or having a pigeon use your new suit as a restroom? Such instances are not significant. They're usually forgotten within a day or two, and therefore do not and cannot develop the soul. Nor do they seem plausibly part of some grand design or plan. They seem, that is to say, meaningless and unnecessary. More meaninglessness than instances of, let's say, great or intense suffering, much more meaningless than these. And truly meaningless, unnecessary suffering is certainly more expected in a world without benevolent supervision than in a theistic paradigm. A successful theodicy, in other words, then, needs to provide not only an account of the great and intense sufferings of the world, but also the menial sufferings which pervade the human experience. Now, I'm actually quite surprised that I've made it this far without mentioning animals yet. It's quite unlike me, but that's a final consideration that does deserve our attention. Whatever theodicy might explain human suffering, the existence of animal suffering seems infinitely more difficult to explain. Animals are not free in the way that we are, and so are immune to the free will defense. They cannot morally develop in the way that we can, and so are immune to soul-making theodicies. They are, on most accounts, not going to heaven, and so they will not be compensated for their suffering. Yet their suffering is immeasurably large. Somewhere, right now, billions of animals are suffering in the wild, from predation, from disease, from hunger, from fear. Imagine a deer with its leg caught under a fallen tree, dying of starved confusion. It doesn't know why it's there. It feels hungry, it's starving to death, and it's trapped under a tree, and it has no idea why. What could possibly be the purpose or meaning of this? I'll remind you that this is exactly the kind of thing that we should expect to see if the natural world is an amoral arena of accidentally existing organisms fighting with each other to stay alive.
Okay, we're almost nearing the end. What's interesting, the reason why I like this this argument is because it cuts across all belief structures. Because even naturalistic atheists, or materialist atheists, or idealists, or whether you're, Advaita Vedanta practitioner, or you're a Zen Buddhist, or you're a Muslim or a Christian, nobody has an answer for why we suffer. I don't have an answer. Alex doesn't have an answer. Just because you reject the premise that there's a benevolent God doesn't absolve you from the mystery of why creatures suffer. Because it's even in that, once you get into that world and you say, well, existence is amoral and there's no divine guidance of affairs on this planet and everything's just evolving and we're in an atheistic universe. It could have evolved in so many ways, assumedly. It could have been just a parade of gravy and biscuits and Starbucks coffee and a nice cool pipe, and it still could have been that way. Or it could have been some it could have been a hellish nightmare where the suffering was indeed, it was tuned, that dial was tuned up to 11, and everybody was just in abject misery all the time. And people were begging to be released. We've landed somewhere in the middle. We have a dual spectrum of bliss over here and misery over here. And even a naturalist can't explain that. So, very good argument. Doesn't just do away with, doesn't just make theism seem dubious, but it's actually a problem that no human being really has an answer for, no matter what their presence or absence of spiritual or religious conviction and what the state of that is in their own consciousness.
But can we really expect this on theism? Should we expect this on theism? What offers a better account? Keep in mind that, in other words, I'm not arguing that theism can offer no account of these kinds of situations and sufferings, though I am skeptical that it can. I'm only arguing that assuming that theism is false offers a better account of it than assuming that theism is true. Assume atheism, assume that human beings and other animals are nothing more than evolved creatures who developed pain receptors to make them more prone to avoiding the menial and great sufferings that upset our survival prospects. On this account, the existence of all suffering, small and great, is not only explained, but expected. Thus, atheism offers a better account, in my view, than theism of three crucial and unavoidable facts: divine hiddenness, geographical religious statistics, and the existence of gratuitous human and non-human suffering. And I am truly excited to hear how Jonathan might account for these on theism in defending it as a more plausible account of our reality. Thank you.
The full conversation that the clip you just watched was taken from is available via the link that just appeared on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
That was an excellent presentation, and what I hope happens for Alex is that he's already discovered non-duality, but what I wish for him, not just philosophically but spiritually, is that he continues this interest in consciousness and in the being and the I am, and whether it has to be in a Buddhist context or a Hindu context. I think if Alex is genuinely puzzling over the nature of the self and attempting to study his own phenomenology and practicing mindfulness, I think as a 27-year-old young man, that's a very healthy thing for him to do. It's not a broad prescription for everybody, but I think he would gain a lot of wisdom and a lot of peace and a lot of, I think it would help him ethically. I think it would lay to rest some of these philosophical anxieties and bugs, and it wouldn't answer every question, but it would actually provide an open space for questioning to appear without the question immediately needing to be satisfied. And I think it would generate a lot of maturity in him, and I think it would give him a lot of value and benefit. So I know he's familiar with Advaita Vedanta. I know he's familiar with Buddhism, and I hope he one day reads I Am That by Nisargadatta. Not because it's going to make him happy, but because it will just deepen and enrich and broaden and provide a lot more depth and nuance to his life and his experience of himself and of other people, and it'll help him grow, and it will and then we can all sit around and have a non-dual chat about the nature of awareness, which I think is actually the next evolution of where we're heading in our society, our culture. These notions of Eastern philosophy, Eastern religion, mindfulness, atheistic metaphysics, secular wisdom, secular philosophy, non-duality. I think this is where, broadly speaking, we're headed as a culture, is into this world. And I think Alex O'Connor is the spear tip of that movement. I think he really has an opportunity to lead a renaissance in this line of inquiry and into these subjects. and he's already doing it. But I hope it accelerates. I hope it keeps going. So that's all I have to say. That was a great video. That's all I have for you guys today. I'm gonna finish cooking my breakfast, and I'm gonna post this video. You'll see this video probably around noon or noon 30 today. And if no one watches it, that's okay. A few people are gonna watch it. That'll be good, and we'll have a little dialogue. We'll have a little discussion. And we'll just share in wisdom, we'll share in philosophy, we'll share in knowledge, we'll share in exploration, and it'll be safe and it'll be compassionate towards each other and show each other love and respect. And we'll gain and we'll grow and we'll move and live together, and it'll be very good. So thank you, Alex, for this opportunity to watch you today. And thank you, whoever's watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.